Hello, my name is Victor Ferran, and I'm going to present my thesis on the master's program in urban mobility, which is called the analysis of walking and cycling networks of the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona. The main purpose of the thesis is to analyze the proposal for the walkable and cyclable networks of the new urban master plan for the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona proposed by AMB. AMB is the public administration in charge of the metropolitan urban planning for the 36 municipalities of the metropolitan area. So the contents of the thesis are divided into 6 parts. The first part, the introduction, it presents the topics of walkability and cyclability, its importance and its implementation in the urban planning process. The second part shows some literature on walkability and cyclability, indexes and the methods used, which are accessibility and between essentiality measures. And a little bit of context of Barcelona. In the third part, research materials on the walkable and cyclable networks, as well as the methods showed to analyze the networks. After that, the fourth part presents the results on the analysis, and the fifth part outlines the main conclusions and the results of the analysis and the implications for planning practice in the future, also the limitations and suggestions for future research. We can start by talking about the benefits of walking and cycling in urban context. WHO publishes the latest evidence to support policy making and practice, in which proposes policies to mitigate climate change that need to be taken priority by our government's agendas. Among those, the important part of mobility and transport, which they propose, is that there has to be a shift to a more sustainable modes of transport in order to fight climate change and to fight as well transport externalities in the cities. The benefits of walking and cycling in cities are mainly public health for the physical activity and the reduction of pollution, traffic congestion, accidents, and reduction of greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming. Now moving on into the measure of walkability and bikeability. In literature, it's usual to measure its accessibility to walking structures such as variety of land uses or access to public transport facilities. And in here, built environment and neighborhood characteristics play a significant role and affects people's decisions on whether they go walking or biking or using another transport to move. As one of the pioneers in walkability, Jane Jacobs defines walkability as a mix of these features listed, such as length of blocks, population density, diversity, and mix of uses, and type of buildings. However, this has been developed after 1961 when she published her book, and has been added other indicators, but she was one of the first on defining them. On the other hand, bikeability measures, one of the most popular measure that ranks 136 most bicycle-friendly cities in the world is the Copenhagen Index, which in a qualitative mode analyzes these 13 categories that rank from 0 to 4 points. Each one of these categories listed here have their own methodology and to be measured, and finally these result in a ranking of the 136 most bicycle-friendly cities. Moving on into walkability indexes. Walkability is defined in literature as the measure to which built environment creates a friendly habitat for people who walk, which is proved to benefit the health of inhabitants and improves the livability conditions of cities. The most common methodologies to measure walkability and also bikeability indexes are surveys gathering data from resident population using questionnaires or interviews, observational data collected using systematic observational methods such as audits, and the third method is the use of geographic information systems, GIS, which is the method used in this thesis that evaluates potential associations between built environment features and active modes of transport such as walking or biking. Some of the most popular walkability measures using GIS include built environment dimensions such as residential density, land use mix, and street connectivity or intersection density. These are common among most of the literature indexes, and other measures that are different in different indexes are commercial density, topography, or access to green areas and public transport, among others, that may change among different authors. Bikeability, which is a quite more novel term than walkability, is defined as an evaluation of an integrated cyclable network for perceived convenience and comfort and access to important destinations. As in walkability measures, surveys and audits are some methods used to evaluate bikeability. However, we will focus on GIS methodology, which common measures among authors in this methodology are the presence of bike path infrastructure and how the bike infrastructure is in the roads, like if it's separated from other paths. Other measures that come from different authors but are not usually common are topography or bike parking, green areas, land use mix, and speed limits. So accessibility is one of the two analyses performed in this thesis. In literature, we find that it plays a very important role on policy making, and it's a concept widely used among transport, geographers, or urban planners. It is directly related to some indicators previously listed, such as street connectivity in built environment, and it's a very useful analysis to identify those areas that have poor access to pedestrian network or areas that connect with facilities and services. In conclusion, the better accessibility to residents and service and work and leisure creates better living conditions for the cities. Measures of accessibility found in literature were gathered in 2004 by Gers, who divides all the accessibility measures into four categories. First is infrastructure-based, location-based, person-based, or utility-based accessibility measures. For this thesis, we will use the method to assess accessibility for pedestrian and bikes and space-time accessibility on a macro level based on the service area method, which could be into the person-based measure started by Miller in 1991. This will indicate the reachable area within a travel time or distance from an individual perspective in the network. One example of accessibility in Barcelona can be found in literature that analyzes accessibility in neighborhoods of the city of Barcelona, made by Marquet and Miralles Guasch in 2014. It shows that high density increase the frequency of proximity trips, and that beyond a certain amount of density, income and sociological levels play a role in determining the local use of the services of the neighborhood. It shows how high income areas use the car more than low income neighborhoods, even though they would have same levels of density. The second analysis performed in the thesis is Between centrality, a technique included in space syntax, which comprises a set of theories and analysis of spatial configurations initiated by Bill Hillier and Julian Hanson in the late 1970s. This is a very useful tool for early planning stages when some built information is not defined or available. Space syntax model is an appropriate mode to analyze networks based on spatial configuration and the choices that human actions are made and the relationships between different spaces. Between centrality also calculates the number of shortest paths that pass along the same segment or node from all origins or destinations of a network within a radius of influence. And high values of centrality for another segment indicate that this one is located between the shortest path of many nodes and origins and destinations. So in the case you would remove that high centrality node, you would affect many shortest path routes, and in the extreme case, you might even be separating two networks by removing the only bridge that connects them. Now, to put some context on the case study, the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona, located in the northeastern region of Spain, Catalonia. It is a highly dense area compared to both Catalonia and Spain, as well as the metropolitan area of Madrid, which is a little bit more than half of the density of Barcelona. However, Madrid has higher population as well as dimension is bigger. Also, regarding dimensions in Catalonia, it only takes about 2% of its footprint. However, it it takes almost half, or 42.8 of its population. It is composed by 36 different municipalities and more than 3.2 inhabitants. It's the biggest metropolis in Catalonia and the second one in Spain after Madrid. It's a heterogeneous territory in which just half of the area consists of open spaces, including forests, agricultural areas, the two main rivers, mountains, and beaches, and the other half is urban land containing mainly residential areas. It is a compact city and it can accommodate higher levels of passengers demands than urban spread fabrics, allowing for more efficient transport systems. However, this compactness of urban fabric also means that public space is very valuable and traffic significantly affects, and it's difficult to include sometimes and combine several modes of transport in the little space dedicated to traffic. If we take a look at the modal share in the metropolitan area of Barcelona, the total of 10.2 million journeys are made every day, are distributed differently depending on the areas they are located. The city itself of Barcelona concentrates the most share on active mobility and public transport, which is a very high share even compared to the most walkable and bikeable cities in Europe. However, while we move into the suburbs, the first ring and suburbs take a bigger share for private cars, and that's the main issue that the master plans want to focus on change. A little bit of history on the planning of the city of Barcelona. The metropolitan city of Barcelona is the result of many different plans and growth that has been experienced in the recent centuries. One of the first expansions in the city was the Place Cerdà in 1860, which comprises the current Eixample grid that made possible the urban growth from a homogeneous plot of streets, providing the city with public space and a grid that would become the skeleton of mobility of the future. However, although it reached neighboring towns such as Sants or Vila de Gracia, that are currently neighborhoods of the city of Barcelona, the main avenues structuring the grid did not end up structuring beyond the territory of the city itself into the metropolitan area. And this was a feature tackled by posterior plannings and projects that tried to connect the city of Barcelona with the adjacent towns in the metropolitan area. However, this would mostly include the use of segregated roads rather than pedestrian or bike paths. And the construction of these segregated infrastructures and the great residential development in the adjacent areas and the neighboring towns of the metropolitan regions have generated a large induced demand of traffic that we are having nowadays. So currently different planning instruments or figures with different areas of influence and different public administration in charge are overlapping on the metropolitan area of Barcelona. The plans that rule bigger areas are the whole region of Catalonia, run by the Catalan administration, as well as the medium size, including the metropolitan region, also run by Catalan government. And finally, the area of interest, the metropolitan area of Barcelona, has two main plans that are complementary to each other, both run by AMB, the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona administration, and therefore these two projects interact and have to be compatibilized in order to converge in areas that have common and established metropolitan consistency. And smaller projects would be the municipal plans or intercity plans that are developed in each territory of interest. The Urban Master Plan, PDU, must go beyond the current planning system and provide an integrated and holistic vision of urban planning that is trying to lay the foundations for the metropolis of the future. The plan intends to be a vector of change in the metropolitan mobility and urban planning. In the long term, wants to influence a change in the territorial planning towards a more sustainable mobility. First of all, it seeks to build a continuity of the human scale through all the metropolitan area in terms of mobility, and it is planned the transformation of segregated roads into what it's called metropolitan avenues that will integrate civic and urban structural avenues, combining active mode of transport with public transportation, as well as leaving some space for private transportation. We can see that different cities in Europe are also doing similar projects. That we can have the example of the city of Helsinki, which is turning traffic arteries into boulevards and creating priority for public transport corridors and urbanization density around those corridors. We can see how the transformation of these roads into avenues will increase the network of walkable and cyclable paths, as well as new paths for the network of public transport. And as part of the project as well is the new centralities that will be developed, where many elements of the plan converge. So we can see this will have mobility hubs as well as areas of development where all segregated road infrastructure was located. In the map, we can see how these new centralities are in gray, and the metropolitan avenues, including all these modes of transport, are in orange, that are in some parts currently segregated roads, in others are already metropolitan avenues, but the plan is seeking to find a continuity through all the metropolitan area. Moving on into part 3, research materials and methods. First, the research materials provided mostly by AMB to make the analysis. First of all, we have the networks for bikeable and cyclable paths of the current state and the proposal state. Then we would have the elevations in order to calculate the restraints of the segments of the network when calculating time, for example. And then we would use also other materials such as the previous analysis made by AMB on mixed use density and green infrastructure in order to analyze the results. Here we can see the current state and the master plan proposal for the walkable networks. We can see that there are not so many new segments added in the proposal. That's because the plan mainly proposes transformation of existing street axis, and as well as some new additions. In our analysis, the analysis focuses on the existence of infrastructure. So our main changes are whether these segments are added or not, and we will not take into consideration the quality of the streets for the accessibility. So the red segments are the ones we will take into account. It's a different case in the case of the cyclable network. We can see that the current state of the network shows quite a disconnected and poor connection between towns, and compared to the walkable network that was a quite already connected network. The proposal of the master plan includes the master plan as well as the BCVIA project, which is a project from AMB to ensure the connectivity between municipalities through bicycle lanes. We can see here in purple how the bicycle network will have the focus on the connection between these municipalities, and we'll see how this performs in accessibility results. Among other materials used to evaluate the results of the analysis, we have used the mixed use density of streets. These maps represents each street weighted by the density of 5 uses: residential, commercial, industrial, leisure, and offices. And we can see where most of the density mixed is located in the metropolitan area of Barcelona. And another material coming from AMB is the green infrastructure network defined by the master plan, which consists of green itineraries. Many of them are already included in the network, but some others are only pedestrian continuity that will be used to analyze as well the results of walkability and bikeability next to the relationship they have with green infrastructure. So moving on into the methodology used to perform the analysis, we have used, as we were saying, GIS analysis and accessibility between the centrality as the main two methods. But first of all, before doing the analysis, we have to create the networks. And in order to create the network with time constraints regarding the slope, we have interpolated the networks with the elevations, and then have calculated the time needed to go through each of the segments. To do that, we have used the Tobler's hiking function represented in this figure, and we have used values of 5 kilometers per hour for pedestrian speed and 20 kilometers per hour for bicycle speed. So once we have the network built, we can perform the analysis with GIS as well by calculating the service area of each of the centroids of the grid in blue here. The service area using the network and the slope values is then divided by the theoretical buffer area calculated using only theoretical values such as time and speed, and slope. For the speed is flat, and these values divided are both already cutting out those areas that are not considered urban ground, such as parks or agricultural, or here in the example we can see how the coastline is cut out from both well, of course the service area is never going to go into the sea, but the buffer would go, so this is already cut out to have a more accurate result for accessibility in all the metropolitan area. And then this is performed for both walkable and cyclable networks, and the second analysis between the centrality is calculated also on the current state for the pedestrian network using walk speed and trips of 30 minutes, and used for the current state, for the proposal state, and the third analysis regarding bike proposed paths. In this case, we also have used the whole complete street network, but now using speed values. This way we can compare the centrality measures for those streets that are thought to accommodate the cyclable path in the project compared to the whole street networks, and evaluate the switchability for those streets that will accommodate a bike path. So moving on into the results section, we can see the map in different intervals from yellow, showing the least accessibility, to dark blue, showing the most. We can see how the city of Barcelona and urban consolidated towns have a high accessibility index compared to areas that can be divided into different regions, why have low accessibility. These are low density of population, topographic features, or because of big infrastructures that segregate the network, such as the airport or port in the center coastal part of the metropolitan area. That's because of the airport and the port, and other areas in the inner territory, which are due to either one of these reasons, low density, or topographic reasons, as well as infrastructure such as highways that cross and segregate the area. The accessibility map of the proposal state, carrying the same methodology with the new segments, shows some difference. However, it's difficult to see it just by comparing these two maps with the same intervals. That is why the next map will plot the difference between the two states and shows the areas where the plan improves the accessibility the most, in a much more clear way. In this map, we can see more clear those areas that are improved by the master plan in terms of accessibility. The area in the city center of Barcelona remains quite yellow, so it means that it has no improvement. That's because already had a high accessibility. However, we see other suburb areas in yellow as well that respond to some of the questions that we were listing before, such as low density or infrastructure in the case of the airport. However, most of the area has a green, so a small improvement, and then some areas that improve in particular, such as the northern area or areas around the River Besòs or River Llobregat, that will be commented in particular in the next slides. Regarding the between centrality of the nodes of the metropolitan network, we can divide into intervals as well. From green, the lowest centrality, to red, the highest. We can see how high centrality values are located in the city centers. That's because of many roads passing through those areas. And we can also differentiate some main avenues that connect by straight lines many different areas in a network. We can see, for example, the area in the diagonal in Barcelona. We will analyze this further in this next analysis. For example, in this map, showing how the centrality of the chosen metropolitan avenues in the master plan compared to the whole centrality of the nodes in the network, we can see how mean and median values are higher for those nodes in the metropolitan avenues. So it means that the metropolitan avenues are in a shortest routes for most of the area in the network. Another comparison made is the comparison between those nodes in the areas where accessibility increased the most, higher than 0.6 increase of accessibility, comparing in that areas the nodes of all the network compared to the nodes of the new added segments. We see how those new added segments will have a higher value of centrality, meaning that not only it's an increase of accessibility, but the addition of those segments will carry higher flux of people than the ones existing around them. However, this analysis, when we look into areas in particular, it shows different results. In the case of Bezos River, we see this is real, so the accessibility improves and also the centrality of the new nodes improve. This is because of a high density of the area it's found, and it shows that those strategically new nodes will perform good in the context. However, when we look at the northern area, where accessibility is the area where accessibility improves the most, centrality is not distributed the same. It has similar values as the already existing. We can say that this is because the area improved by accessibility is not as dense as Bezos River, and it's more an interurban area among different towns, and density is quite low. So those segments might not be especially used. They are in the mean and median values. However, these are very good for improvement of accessibility among those different towns. And finally, the case of Llobregat, especially Samboy, performs similar to the Bezos area. So both accessibility and centrality of the new nodes are higher than the areas around them due to the higher density and connectivity among areas in the network. Moving on into the bike infrastructure analysis, we can see the current state using the same methodology, how the current bicycle network is quite poor and disconnected among different municipalities. That's because for many years there has not been a holistic project for a cycle network in the metropolitan area. Instead, each municipality has had their own projects in case they had any. So the fragmentation of the networks result in a low index of bikes accessibility along all the metropolitan area, except for the city of Barcelona, where higher indexes are found, and this is because they had their own project and also the area is bigger. So due to the method used, bigger areas will respond better in terms of the index. When looking at the results of the master plan and the BCBA proposal for accessibility, we can see a clear improvement in the whole metropolitan area. That's due to the project that we saw before. The network configuration will unite and connect all the metropolitan cities, and due to the kind of methodology used, this allows the service area to grow a lot, and dividing it by the buffer, it will show a high result in index of accessibility. We still see some yellow areas. These can be answered by similar reasons as before. So the area of the big infrastructure, such as the port, the airport, as well as topography issues that with bike are even more important. Now looking at the plot comparing the current and the proposal state, we see how, similar to the walking map, the central area of the city of Barcelona improves less than the direct adjacent areas. That's where the improvement is the highest. That is because these interurban areas within the metropolitan areas are the most benefited by the plan projected, and then lower increase improve in the accessibility is found in the outer ring in the metropolitan area. That's because the project of the BCVia and the master plan does not go beyond into the region. So those areas connect very well into the center of the metropolitan area, but do not connect so well to the outskirts. So in result, we have lower accessibility index. The last analysis performed is the return centrality for bikes in the network of streets, on the whole network of streets. We see how comparing the values on the pedestrian paths chosen by the project compared to the values of the nodes of the whole network, these chosen streets are highly central and so are good in terms of shorter path routes. Now moving on into conclusions, we can see how the current state of the network has already high accessibility, in particular in the city centers due to the high density, but the plan improves overall in small proportion. However, in some areas such as the northern or the river areas improves in particular. Those areas that rank the lowest can be answered due to topography, infrastructure, or low density reasons. This is also seen as the materials at the analysis made by AMB, where high density uses also relate directly with the accessibility, and those areas that have low mixed density of use perform lower as well in accessibility. However, those areas that have low accessibility are also tackled in the plan by green infrastructure connections. However, it's not enough in terms of accessibility, at least used by this method. And finally, we can see how the proposed metropolitan avenues rank well in terms of bitumen centrality, meaning that these are located in shortest path and will be good connectors among different metropolitan cities using active modes of transport as well as public transport. Regarding the bikeability and the cyclable paths, we see how in the current state the network shows a very low connectivity and accessibility, but the master plan along with BCVia plan will improve a lot the accessibility throughout the totality of the metropolitan area. In particular, those areas around the city of Barcelona, so the first ring in the metropolitan area, will be the most improved. And the analysis on the bike paths in particular show that these will be also connecting important number of nodes. So these are regarding shortest path routes. All these different results on accessibility, between centrality, added to the mixed use density as well as the green infrastructure, can be very useful for future planning, transport, and urban development in the area of Barcelona, and as well as they will also be used in the present urban master plan. However, this can also be used in other sectors that were not targeted in this thesis, but for example, private sector such as real estate or where to allocate companies can be a useful tool to also take into consideration. And some suggestions for future research or some things that can be added in the study are more indicators such as the new streets land use, which was not added in this research, as well as the an indicator on the quality of streets for both pedestrian and bikes. This is something that many authors in literature added in their indexes and could be a good indicator to be added as well in this research for future. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope you enjoyed, and if you have any questions, you can contact me. Thank you.